Welcome to Beyond the Pod, presented by SodaStick.com.
Brunette, he moves, Brunette back in, he scores! Minnesota has upset the Colorado Avalanche! Andrew Brunette, the game-winning goal!
Here are your hosts, the second greatest scorer in Gopher hockey history, Pat Micheletti, and the second greatest hockey analyst on this podcast, Brandon Mileski.
Hello, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of Beyond the Pod. I'm Brandon Mileski. He's Pat Micheletti. As always, Beyond the Pod brought to you by SodaStick.com. Hello, Patrick.
Good morning, Brandon.
I always love when we get to talk to my favorite Micheletti, who, of course, one of my favorites, NHL analyst, covers the New York Rangers very, very well. I'm sure Pat gets steals all your takes. Joe Micheletti.
Without a doubt, I do. Yes.
Now joins us. Joe, appreciate your time as always. I first want to get to, I know it's a little bit of an old topic now, but the Jack Eichel situation, I want to get your opinion on this because I found the Eichel stuff interesting in terms of what interest would be in him, because you have a guy who clearly is talented, not often is a number one center like that available. That being said, he has a big salary. He has a significant neck surgery. You're going to have to give up big assets to get him. There's always questions because he was in a losing organization, how he is in terms of leadership and culture in the locker room and that kind of stuff. So I want to know, Joe, if you were an NHL GM, would you have had interest in Jack Eichel?
Yes, without question. I think he's a terrific player. I think that I don't think you can judge him on his leadership based on what's gone on in Buffalo. I mean, they haven't made the playoffs in 10 years or so. Yeah. There's been so many issues there for years now, and they just haven't been able to right the ship. And so I don't think that should be. I don't think Jack Eichel should be judged based strictly on that, because when you look at his production has been pretty darn good since he's been there, and the teams haven't been very good. So would I be interested in him? There's no question I'd be interested in him. And now, was there risk involved with Vegas making the deal? Certainly. Because of the upcoming surgery. And it's really interesting because you hear differing of opinions on both sides. Now, the Buffalo doctor said, we don't trust this, or we're not in favor of it. I shouldn't say trust, but we're not in favor of it. And supposedly their team doctor is someone that had tremendous knowledge of this. But then you listen to other people, and there's other teams and GMs that I have talked to that have discussed it with their doctors, and a lot of those GMs were told that as long as you get the right doctor to do the surgery, then there's a lot of confidence that he'll be able to come back and play at a high level. So there's all of that, and then then I listened to Jack Eichel's interview and discussing what was going through his mind and what his head. And you know what? I don't blame the guy for saying, "Listen, I'm in control of my body and my mind, and I should have a say in how I get treated." And I agree with him on that. I totally agree with him on that. If he thinks that, and doing all his research, and he's had buddies that have had the neck fusion done, and it hasn't turned out that great, and they've had some negative effects. For him to get this done and do all the research that he did on this and think that this is the best thing to do, I can't blame him.
I want to get to the, you hear a lot about the, his personality, the leadership, all of that. And he hasn't been with an organization. That's one. Now, I think we can, overblow it because they've been so bad and, he's the captain. But, how much of that is on the coach, on the management, on, the players around him? Did he potentially develop that, stigma, whatever, because of that?
Well, I think that it's fair to say that there was some baggage involved when he was drafted. There was no question about, forget the talent of the player and forget that. But were there some whispers about other things, about his personality when he got drafted? Yes, there absolutely were. And that continued when he got to Buffalo. But I always defer to this. For us to start thinking, not just us that are in the media, but fans as well, and we get so inundated with these ideas that we should count on these 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old kids
Right.
to be the answer is a total mistake. I mean, how often does Gretzky or Crosby or Lemieux or those guys come along? Yeah, I had a good discussion with Dave Tippett the other day. We were up in Edmonton playing, and he and I were just talking about the Rangers in particular. We have a lot of young players, and he asked me about that, and I said there's some ups and downs. And he said, when I took over this team, when he started coaching in Edmonton, he said when I got here, McDavid and Draisaitl were still these kids. Same thing. Emotional. They weren't ready to handle being leaders. But now they're, Draisaitl's 25. McDavid's going to turn 25. And this is the year that they've shown this maturity level.
Yeah.
That team is first. They don't care about the points. They want to win. And so these kids are, 5 years older than some of these, the Rangers kids that get criticized for not being consistent with their play. And so, you have to think of Eichel that way as well. He comes from, even if there was some baggage with him, to come into Buffalo at 19, 20, 21, 22 and expect to take this franchise to the promised land when you have other issues. It's so hard to win in this league. It's so hard to win, and you can't just do it with one or two players. And even if Eichel was perfect, he wouldn't have been able to get that team to the playoffs in the last number of years.
Okay, you brought up Draisaitl and McDavid. Let's talk about the two young kids that you guys have in Kakko and Lafreniere. How much harder is it for them in New York compared to being in Edmonton, where you don't get, yes, there's media, of course, but not like New York, right? How much difficult is it for them to get up, to mature, to get up to speed, to not listen to all the outside noise? Because, they're both obviously very talented players, or else they wouldn't have gone 1 and 2, in their draft years. But, how difficult is that for them in New York?
I actually think it's more difficult being in Canada than it is in New York. Hockey is not number one in New York. Football, baseball, basketball. So you can go into New York City as a member of the Rangers or just about any of these other teams. That's the one thing about the athletes in New York. You can go hide. You can go walk the street. You can go have dinner someplace, and you're not going to be inundated all the time like you are in the Canadian cities. The other thing is that it depends on the makeup of the team. Because here in New York, you have, and let's not forget Keandre Miller, who's 20 and playing the toughest position, playing defense, and doesn't have 100 games under his belt yet. Who plays regularly. But here in New York, you've got Panarin, Zibanejad, Fox, who is only 23. But you have a Kreider, who's been around for a long time. So you've got some really high-end players. So even though the young players, there's pressure on them, you can kind of protect them a little bit because you have these other high-end players that I think most people are expecting to carry the load. So even though there's still pressure on those kids, there would be more pressure if they were in Canada as opposed to being in New York.
Okay.
All right, Joe, your 4 division leaders right now, as we speak. I know it's early in the season. Carolina, Florida, Minnesota, Edmonton. All 4 teams, I think, that had playoff aspirations, but not necessarily your Stanley Cup favorites before the season began. Which of those 4 do you think is the most for real and most likely to win their division this year?
Florida's for sure, for real, for sure, I should say. You go back to the series they had with Tampa Bay last year in the playoffs. Tampa Bay did everything they possibly could to hang on to that series, and I think Florida's better this year. So Bobrovsky is if he continues the way he started, he's been out with an injury, but he's ready to come back. So if they get the goaltending, and Spencer Knight seems like a special young goalie. So Florida is better than they were last year. So certainly they are someone that I think all season long is going to be up there. And I watch Minnesota play. When I watch their team play, it reminds me of Bill Guerin. That's the way it reminds me of. He's got a team. If you're not a team guy, he gets rid of you. If you worry more about your own personal statistics as opposed to the team winning, guess what? You're going to be gone. And so you watch Minnesota play now, and I don't have to tell you guys or the people in Minnesota, but are they not fun to watch? I mean, you talk about team, and that's Billy. That's Bill Guerin. Dean Evason's the same way. But Billy's career, when you study his career as both a player and an executive, that's him all the way. Team. How do we build this team? Get the best players that believe in winning as a team. Get a coach that can get everybody together and think that way. And that's them. So I think they're going to be there all season. I don't think they're as talented as some of the other teams. I mean, they could have used Jack Eichel, a healthy Jack Eichel, because I don't think center is their best position. But but you talk about utilizing everybody. Everybody cares about each other and finding ways to win. That's them. Edmonton, I think, is going to be there. They added 5 unrestricted free agents and made 2 trades, and so they have more depth. They've got more size. The biggest question in Edmonton is, will their goaltending hold up? Mike Smith has been out with an injury. He's 40 now, 39, 40, and can Koskinen carry the load? I don't have a lot of confidence in him, so I might think that Ken Holland might try and get a goaltender before the end of the season, because I think other than that, it's a team that's got more depth and they're good. So and who was the other one I'm missing?
Carolina.
Carolina's top notch. The only thing that I think about with Carolina is their goaltending as well. I mean, they got rid of 3 goaltenders, 3 new ones. But I think Brendan Moore gets the absolute most out of every player. I love the way they play. They've got depth. They can skate. They attack. They're relentless. And so goaltending would be the only thing that I would be a little skeptical of in Carolina. But they're a heck of a team.
Okay, Joe, I don't think I've ever asked you this question, but we all know, the season, it's a long season. Some teams get off to a great start. Some teams, like the Chicago Blackhawks, out of the gate, they struggle. That being said, what are some of the intangibles that you have seen over the years that keeps a team from dipping, from all of those, kind of staying at that consistent level, right, all season long?
Well, I'll just give you an example of a team that I cover, and that's and the Rangers. So the Rangers' record is 7-3-3. Not sure that's indicative of the way they played as a team, but their goaltender has been all world. So you know what? And it's important to remember that you can't win in this league without good goaltending. You can't. If you want to win, you can't have average goaltending. You have to have good goaltending to win. So you got to remember that the goaltender is part of the team. Yeah. So for the Rangers, they had this road trip. They led 2-0 in Vancouver going into the third period and lost. Yeah. They gave up another lead to Calgary. Anyway, they've been giving up third period leads, and yet their record is 7-3-3 because their goaltending is. So first and foremost, your goaltender can save you early if you have a good enough team, which I think the Rangers do, to right the ship. And they played 2 of 3 good periods and can't finish it off. That's kind of a learning thing. It's new personnel, it's new coaching, it's new systems, it's all of that. So that's first and foremost. And then you have to have the leadership that you don't start pointing fingers when things start going a little south. Yeah, and we know the teams that are rebuilding and that that are not going to have much of a chance.
Right.
But there's a number of teams that are good enough to make the playoffs. And there's probably easily 20 teams that can make the playoffs, easily, maybe more. And so you've got to have good leadership in order to get through those rough spots. And I think you always give, I think you got to give it 20 or 25 games to kind of see what you have. But if you can just hang in early on, that's the biggest thing. You just hang in points wise early on, and you give yourself a chance.
Well, let me ask you about 2 more teams, even though we're not 25 games in, and that would be Colorado and Vegas, both thought to be 2 of the best teams in the league, 2 of the best teams in the Western Conference. Off to slow starts. Obviously, they've had some injury issues, but both right now sitting at 6 in their respective divisions. Is there any reason to be concerned with either of these 2 teams, or is it one of those things where over 82 games, they'll be at the top?
Well, they've stayed close enough. It's not like they're, have 1 or 2 wins. You mentioned the injuries. Injuries have been a major factor with both those 2 teams.
Yeah.
And you can only lose your top players for so long. It's like losing your top goaltender when there's a gap between 1 and 2. A lot of times you can get him in there. He can, the backup can win you a few games on adrenaline, but over time, you're probably not going to win with your backup if there's a big gap between the 2. So the concern that you have is that, are these things going to continue to linger? Now, you've got McKinnon. They just announced is going to miss another 3 weeks. They've already had injuries to some of their other key players.
Yeah.
So, that can wear on you. And especially as competitive as this league is. So I think it's too early to be concerned with those teams, but without question, they got to get those top players back healthy again and playing.
Joe, thank you so much for your time. As always, really appreciate it. I know you're busy out on the East Coast covering your team and probably getting some golf in as well.
Not as much golf as I'd like, but great to be with you.
You and me both, Joe.
You're the best.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Joe
guys.
Micheletti, brother of Pat Micheletti. Of course, he does some analyst work for the New York Rangers and always one of my favorite national analysts when he gets on the broadcast. Before I talk with you, Pat, my other favorite Micheletti, let's talk about SodaStick.com. Of course, SodaStick.com, a sponsor of Beyond the Pod. You got to go to SodaStick.com to get your original Minnesota sports-inspired goods. If you haven't seen the stuff yet, you got to check it out. All of their apparel screen printed here in Minnesota on super soft, super comfy shirts. You will love it. And we're going to hook you up with 15% off your next order. So use the code KFAN for 15% off. That is SodaStick.com, SodaStick.com. Original Minnesota sports-inspired goods. Use the code KFAN for 15% off your next order. Pat,
for you.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I want your thoughts on the new line of Ek, Fiala, and Foligno.
You know my thoughts on it?
Yeah.
I think it's been fine. You know what? People get really caught up on the wild lines.
Yep.
Let's be honest. There is no perfect situation of lines you can put together because they don't have the center.
Yeah.
To put in that spot. So it's like
right.
Every time a line changes, people are like, "Oh, I like this line. I don't like this line." Blah blah blah. And Fiala I thought played very well last night in Arizona. At the time, we're taping this podcast on a Thursday, so if you're listening after the Vegas game, we haven't seen that game yet. But in Arizona, I thought Fiala was really, really good. Obviously, Kaprizov and Zuccarello are just always going to be together because they're great together. Do I love Gaudreau with them? No. Right. Do I think Foligno and Eriksson Ek and either a Greenway or Hartman would be great together? Yes. I mean, the good thing for this team is, Pat, is I think Nico Sturm's playing very well.
Yep.
Ryan Hartman's playing very well. Brandon Duhaime is playing good enough.
Yep.
And they've kind of put you in a spot where you can move Eriksson Ek and Foligno around a little bit, and you're still getting good third line production there.
Remember when we talked this summer about maybe you try him there? He hasn't played in a year and a half, or almost 2 years. Marco Rossi between Kaprizov and Zuccarello.
Yeah.
Rossi's got 9 points in his last 6 games in Iowa. That, and I'm not saying, hey, you got to bring him up now, right?
Yeah.
What, things are rolling with this team, and they're, so, but my point is, man, it's really, really good to see him, doing what he's supposed to do for a number 1 pick. And he seems to be picking up the game fairly quickly.
Well, and Pat, ultimately, the organization's in a good spot right now, other than the Parisi Suter stuff, right?
Yeah.
But
right.
How many times throughout the Wild's history have we seen them force up first-round draft picks who aren't ready to play in the National Hockey League, but they're forced to play in the National Hockey League because their players on the NHL team, they didn't have enough depth, they didn't have enough good players. I think they're in a good spot right now where, do I want to see Rossi up at the NHL team eventually? Of course I do.
Yep.
Do I think he's going to be a good NHL player? Of course I do. But if we can keep him down and he can develop while we're winning at the NHL level and still scoring and still producing, to me that's the ultimate combination of, well, let's keep him down there as long as we can. And we don't have to force him into the situation where maybe he's not ready yet. So by the time, if this is right now, we're all healthy, right? Eventually there's going to be some injuries and maybe you do force him up. But as long as you stay healthy and all the players are contributing and they're getting scoring from everywhere, if you can keep stretching this out as long as possible, by the time you're ready to have Rossi come up, he's 100% ready and he's full go. It's not, hey, let's bring him up for a couple games and then send him down and up a couple games. Like we'll be ready to have him a full-time player at this. I mean, I think that's what Bill Guerin has in mind. And I think it's great for both aspects of the organization.
I think Joe brought up a great point too about, that age, right? Draisaitl, McDavid, when they were 21, 22, listen, there is no doubt, guys like, Rossi and then the McDavids and the Draisaitl, that's why they were drafted as high as they were, because they are talented. But we can't forget, and sometimes I think people do, and they want things in a rush, but maturity, learning, you're playing against men now. It's the best league in the world. You got to give these guys time to get there. I mean, think about it. Rossi could be playing in college right now. And I see enough of college guys where, you say, oh, well, boy, this guy's the star of the team, should be great every night. Well, you're not, because you know why? Because sometimes, you're still growing as a person, you're growing as a player, the maturity level and understanding what you have to do every night. Just because you have talent does not mean that you will dominate, immediately anywhere. And so, and that's why you really have to applaud the management here for not being swayed by media, by fans, by this or that he has to make this knee-jerk reaction and get Rossi in the lineup, get Boldy in the lineup. Why isn't he could be better in that? You just gotta take a step back and I think they've done a great job of managing their players.
Well, and even with Rossi and all young players, I think, Pat, too often we expect that their upward trajectory is a straight line up at all times, right? And let's face it, it's going to go up and it's going to go down, it's going to go up, it's going to go down. So, you mentioned Rossi's great start, but eventually teams in the AHL are going to be focused on a player like him and go, well, we got to make sure we stop him. We got to play him differently. He's going to have to adjust to that. And then he's going to have to adjust to the NHL level. And then he might have success at the NHL level. And then other teams are going to take notice of that, right? I mean, Kaprizov, might have been going through a little bit of that early on in the season. I think we just expect that development to be a straight line all the time. And it's not like that.
No, not at all.
The good news is, though, Kaprizov now has scored 3 goals in his last 4 games. I know people were concerned about him and I never really was too concerned about his start.
No.
I thought Fiala played, like I mentioned, very well in Arizona last night. It's amazing how one game and you get 3 points and you shoot up the score sheet and the stats
Right.
a little bit.
Right. And again, I say it all the time, but it's the best league in the world, and there's good players on every team, and you get targeted, and you get, especially when you get that status. But look at Kaprizov's, he's got 3 goals now, right? But he's still their leading scorer, at least into last night. So it's not like, he's a point producer. Yes, you want him to get 50 goals, of course. But you know what? I was never worried about him. Maybe he didn't have some good games, but again, you're not going to be great every single night. And we get, and I'm as guilty as anybody, you just think, boy, oh boy, guy's going to do it every night. But it's hard.
It is.
It's really hard to do.
Well, one guy that we've been critical about not doing it every night is Jordan Greenway. They got him back last night after he missed 4 games with a lower body injury. And I want to talk about him, Pat, because he's always just been kind of assumed to be your third line stalwart with when it was Eriksson Ek and Foligno and whoever he got. And let's face it, they have some other guys now that are very capable. I mentioned Nico Sturm. I mentioned Brandon Duhaime. Ryan Hartman, I think, can go anywhere in the lineup at this point. He can play wing. He can play center. He could play in your first line if you need. He can play in your third line. He can fit those roles. And Greenway's coming off an injury.
Yep.
But I don't think he's just going to be given those minutes like he once was. He's going to have to earn them back.
Brandon, I think this is the best thing that could have happened to Jordan Greenway, and that is being pushed, just like you just said. He knows now that guys are capable, right? We've seen it. And, maybe, because we've always been, where's that spark? Where's that consistency? Where's that, complete manhandling of defensemen and owning the front of the net and, all that stuff. He's got the body, he can skate, all the attributes, right? But maybe he hasn't been pushed. And maybe that will be the light switch to say, I've got to do it every night, and again, it's not a physical thing. It's all upstairs, and it's all, and so, hopefully, because you know what, when he is on his game, man, that's someone you want in your lineup, right? And so, I hope that sparks him a little bit. We'll have to wait and see.
You mentioned defensively. One of the topics, and we've talked about this before, was your 6 defensemen with all the change you had, all the turnover going into the season. I didn't know much about John Merrill and Dmitry Kulikov going into the season.
No one, not a lot of Wild fans did because they were all, played out east.
Yeah.
Kulikov, did I see him play before? Probably. Did I notice him? Probably not. But, yeah.
But I mean, Kulikov specifically, the blue line in general has got the most points out of a defensive group in the NHL right now. And the Kulikov on that third pairing, he's a lot more offensive minded than I had thought of. Man, that was a pretty patient goal he had for a defenseman to be that patient and wait. That doesn't, defensemen aren't in that spot very often with the puck, and to show that patience in that goal against Arizona last night, I thought was impressive. John Merrill, I know he's actually contributed a little bit offensively. He had a goal last night. I don't see a lot of that moving forward, but he's been solid enough. And other than a couple games from Dumba, where Dumba's been great for most of the season, but he's had a couple games recently where he's turning the puck over. But for the most part, 1 through 6, obviously Spurgeon and Brodin are as good as they've ever been.
Yeah.
They're pretty good back there on that blue line.
Yeah, there's been no issues in my opinion. But one guy, I think I talked about Dumba last week, how great he's been. But I don't know if we talk enough about Brodin. I just, we
don't.
Because why? Because you don't have to, right?
Yep.
And he's never going to get the accolades that he probably deserves because he's not, he's got 6 points, right? And he's not your offensive dynamo. Probably because he doesn't try to be, and I think he's one of the best defensemen in the league.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that's not going to show up on the stat sheet a lot. He's not
Right.
going to give you a lot of wow plays.
Nope.
But I'm guessing, like, if you pulled the guy like Nathan McKinnon, like who's hard for you to get around, and I'm
Yeah.
guessing Jonas Brodin would be high on that list. And he's just he doesn't make mistakes, and we don't talk enough, Pat, about how clean this team is getting out of their own zone
Right.
because of guys like Brodin and Spurgeon, and how that leads to offense.
Oh, yeah. You get the puck out of your zone. You're not going to give up a lot of goals. You're not going to give up zone time, and and that kind of feeds into how Everson wants to play. They're playing faster. Well, why are they playing faster? Because their D are getting it and either carrying it out or making that one pass, and they're gone. And and I tell you what, that helps the guys who maybe aren't as quick or whatever. They're getting up and into the play and then into the offensive zone. And I was talking to someone last night, and they said, "Boy, aren't they just a fun team to watch?"
They
And
are.
and really, this is an entertaining game. You want it to be an entertaining game, and thus far, we're seeing that.
Let's segue to college hockey, Pat. The state of Minnesota still has 4 highly ranked teams,
Yep.
including St. Cloud State, number 1 in the nation after sweeping Colorado College last weekend.
Yeah, they are. They're case in point again, maturity. They're a very, very mature team, and they don't panic. They know how to win. Their goalie's a 5th-year guy. Boy, you start to add and look at all those things, and and that's really one of the big keys to their success. And in Minnesota, as we talked about, they have older guys, but they also have 5 freshmen in the lineup, and those guys are really good players, but learning, and so it takes a little bit of time, and so you can't deny the fact that the maturity and the age really makes a big difference in the success of your team.
Yeah, the Gophers were at Madison last weekend, and the Friday night game, they had the early 2-0 lead, and they blew that, and then they were gift wrapped the empty net own goal by Wisconsin. Yeah. Pretty disappointing loss, I thought, in a game in which you should have had control of, but they did respond with a nice win Saturday night.
Yeah, they won Saturday, and Friday. Yeah, you get a 2-0 lead on the road. You've got to understand that you do have a 2-0 lead on the road, and you got to finish it off. And that's all about the learning process again. So, but good to see them bounce back. They're 3-1 in their last 4. They're playing better. They're not giving up as many bad goals as they were earlier in the year, defending a lot better. And, starting to get there. Of course, not there yet, but that's what you want to build to when you get to January and February, when you really got to buckle down.
Yeah, they got Ohio State this weekend, another team that is 3-1 in the Big Ten. They've won 3 games in a row. They're off to a pretty decent start at 6-2 overall. What do you know, if anything, about the Buckeyes?
Well, they got a freshman goaltender who is right now people are saying one of the best in the country. Jakub Jobish has been terrific back there, and they've got a really good coaching staff. They had quite a bit of turnover from last year's team, and we knew guys on their team from a year ago, and some have obviously moved on. So it's a newer group, but they've got a really good freshman class. And listen, again, younger team learning, and now they're starting to get what Steve Rollick and Steve Miller are trying to implement there. So it's good. It's not a slam dunk series. I can guarantee you that.
Wasn't a slam dunk series for Minnesota State last weekend. They upset by Ferris State on Friday night. They do come back though for that 5-1 Saturday win. They will host Bowling Green, who's off to a decent start in the CCHA this weekend.
I chuckle a little bit when and people are passionate and well, this league's the best, that league's the best, and all the stuff. Hey, in college hockey, anybody can beat anybody on any night. I don't care. Wisconsin goes in to highly touted Michigan with their 7 first-round picks and get a split on the road there. Could have maybe won the first night with a little luck. You know, and so that's the thing. You know, you may laugh at this, but there are some D3 teams on a given night that could beat a lot of the D1 teams. And that's no joke, you know. So, you know, you're talking college kids. You're talking 18 to 21-year-olds. Some have 22-year-olds, whatever. But, you know, you hope your team is prepared. You hope they're ready. But, man, you know, you just don't know. And some nights you just don't got it. You know, it's just a fact. So, you know, and that's why college hockey is so fun, because, you know, you don't know what you're going to get on from a Friday to a Saturday, and, you know, how you handle losing the first night, and, you know, or can you complete the sweep the second night? And that's why it's so great.
Pat, for those watching on the KFN YouTube channel, they all recognize that you're wearing an outdated shirt. It's Bally Sports North now. It's not Fox Sports North.
I'll cover it. Yeah, well, you know, it's what I got. No.
Pat, appreciate your time as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Brandon. Take care.
All right, he's Pat Micheletti. I'm Brandon Mileski. This has been another episode of Beyond the Pod, brought to you by Soda6.com. Make sure you like and subscribe if you are listening on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts. Or, of course, if you are watching on the KFN YouTube channel, we appreciate that as well. Make sure you subscribe and comment and like and do all that stuff. Thank you so much for watching or listening to Beyond the Pod. We'll talk to you next week. Have a good week. Bye.